Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another forecast here by Adrian Weather Forecast. And this is going to be another update here on the North Atlantic. We have a lot to talk about. For those who are wondering why I am posting super duper early, I had decided that I'm going to start doing video updates that are a little bit less descriptive and a lot less, longer in the morning here so you guys can get updated when you guys wake up and all that before the 8 a.m. advisory. I'm still going to have my uploads in the afternoon. They're still going to be very long and descriptive, but I decided to maybe have some more uploads in the morning so you guys can get overall more updates throughout the day. So that's exactly why I'm posting super early, and I'm hoping I can continue the schedule, and you guys let me know if you guys like the schedule or not. It's currently 5:57 in the morning, and this video, I have no idea when it's going to go up, but it most likely will go up before I actually get to school. But let's go ahead and get into the forecast here. So here's a look at the overall North Atlantic 5-day tropical weather outlook, and you can see we have a good amount of activity going on now in the Western Atlantic, and you can kind of see we kind of have a area of triangle of activity here. So we have obviously now Tropical Depression 8 in the Bermuda region. Grace is now once again a tropical depression, and now Fred is now a thriving tropical storm here heading for the Florida Panhandle. So a lot has kind of changed here. I mean, Invest 96L went from like 0% of formation to a 90-90 so quickly, and obviously it actually had a pretty good core considering it was an Invest at the time, and it is now a tropical depression. There actually is a good amount of confidence this could very well become a pretty strong tropical storm. It is 35 miles an hour, 1,012 millibars, and it's only moving south-southwest at 5 miles an hour. And the actual track itself is quite strange when you actually look at it. So let's go ahead and look at the actual discussion. So here's look at the track. We'll be looking more into that later on. Let's get into the actual discussion. You can see they want 65-mile-an-hour peak here, and they actually had a 65-mile-an-hour peak on the very first advisory. So they have a ton of confidence since it's going to be moving quite slow, and it has a pretty conducive environment, including extremely warm waters. There's definitely a good chance it could get that stronger, maybe even stronger. So look at the very bottom paragraph. Vertical shear is going to be very low, less than 10 knots for the next 36 hours or so, and that is most likely the time when the cyclone will strengthen. Thereafter, an increase in the shear to 20 knots or more is expected to cap the intensification process. The H-Wharf model has the cyclone into a major hurricane by 72 hours, but this is scenario considered to be an extreme outlier given the amount of shear forecast to affect the system on day 3 to 5. So the H-Wharf is doing the typical H-Wharf and going kaboom, and they actually wanted to have like at 946 millibars. And I think we all know that's not going to happen. I mean, the environment's really, really conducive for 2 days, so it could easily get 65 by that point, because again, it's already 35. It's about to be a tropical storm. This will very well be tropical storm Henri. It's not like a Fred, because Fred is now getting its act together. It's now 50 miles an hour. It was named 50 miles an hour, or it was given 50 miles an hour, I believe, at 11 o'clock here. And it is now lowering pressure quite significantly now at only 1,002 millibars, and it should be getting into the triple digits very, very soon. Here, actually, Fred was 999 at some point. I believe it was 5,999 on at 11, but I guess it's gone up pressure a little bit. And it's now going due north at 9 miles an hour, so heading for the Alabama/Florida coast here, but obviously heading directly though for areas like Destin Beach. So let's look at the discussion for this. Obviously, we do have tropical storm warnings obviously in effect for this area. We're gonna start getting a little bit more into the actual forecast, like the actual storm surge and all that later on here. So the peak here, hitting the peak at the 60 miles an hour. So the peak is once again on the rise. And honestly, I think the thing could possibly even get 65 miles an hour. But either way, we are looking at a high end or a moderate tropical storm for landfall. We're looking at tropical storm conditions are expected in the tropical storm warning area, which is obviously across portions of just the panhandle, not Alabama. This thing has really no winds and no initiation or even convection on the western quadrant of the low pressure. This low pressure is rather on the very edge of the convection burst. So again, things are rather open, and there is some dry air towards the west preventing initiation. So areas like Pensacola or Fort Walton or Mobile should not have to worry about really much. Through Tuesday, though, heavy rainfall will lead to some widespread flash flooding across portions of the Florida Panhandle, all the way up to the southeast and mid-Atlantic. So I'm actually looking at some overall pretty strong winds, or pretty significant flooding as well. So first, moving northward now, the latest National Hurricane Center model guidance remains in excellent agreement that Fred will continue moving in the general northward motion today, and the cyclone moves through a breakage subtropical ridge that is oriented east to west across the northern Florida region. So there is kind of a ridge that is being pushed northward, and that is really decreasing a lot of that vertical shear at this point. This track guidance has shifted slightly to the east of the previous advisory track, so it continues to really push eastward here. In Let's see here, previous track and the new official forecast track has been nudged in the direction, but not as far east as the tightly packed consensus models are looking overall the fridge, overlooking the strength of the ridge here, and kind of obviously going to really affect the actual strength of the storm here. Let's actually look at the peak storm surge. Obviously, there is going to be some storm surge, and actually, storm surge will be quite high considering uh, the strength of the system. Only probably 60, maybe 65 mile an hour tropical storm, and we're looking at a pretty widespread area of 3 to 5 foot storm surge. And actually, 5 foot storm surge, it's quite a lot of storm surge here. And actually, I believe anywhere from 3 plus can actually pick up a car and take it downstream. But we're even looking at storm surge from 1 to 3 feet all the way from the Alabama Florida border. So again, things kind of heading for a landfall right here. So obviously, there's going to be very little effects towards the actual west. The only reason why there's actually some storm surge there is because that counterclockwise flow is bringing in those waves, and obviously kind of stronger dangerous moving waters still to the west here. However, the worst of it will be to the northeast, because we'll be seeing obviously the strongest amount of counterclockwise flow, the strongest winds there as well, so bringing the higher waves. And obviously that's obviously going to bring in a lot more, I guess you say, storm surge, or higher storm surge is the way to say it. Let's look at the actual storm surge warnings and watches here. So let's see, I understand. So we do have some storm surge warnings here across much of Florida. There's actually, looks like there's no tropical storm watches at all here. So we do have tropical storm warnings here for this general region across the Big Bend, obviously specifically near Cedar Key, and just obviously towards Big Bend, where we've seen that 3 to 5 foot storm surge. We do not really have any watches or anything, but we have a specific area, and this goes all the way down there to almost also Springs. So we're looking at overall some pretty widespread storm surge. And let's actually look at the actual flash flooding threat here, because again, it's going to be pretty significant. We're watching for some really significant rain all the way from the Panhandle up to the North Carolina Appalachian Mountains. So I'm actually right in the middle of that 4 to 6 here. I'm obviously right here. So I'm looking at some pretty significant rain as well, but looking at widespread areas to the northeast of the actual landfall, such as areas like Apalachicola, areas obviously to the kind of east of or west of Tallahassee, kind of looking at as well. Mexico City Beach could very well get anywhere from 6 to 10 inches, and as well, those really high elevations, we can get 6 to 10 inches as well in that general region in northeast Georgia and western North Carolina. And last but not least, let's now get a look here at Grace. And Grace has been downgraded to a 1010 millibar 35 mile tropical depression, just because how ugly it's been looking here. Let's get a look at the actual discussion though. So the peak is the peak is getting up to 60 now, and that's going to be when it actually goes into the Gulf of Mexico. And there actually has been a pretty big southern shift here within this track. This low circulation has really been found a lot more to the south, and that's obviously a line for since this thing's going to start going more due west, being steered by the trade winds, because how weak it is and not really the actual trough. That's obviously going to be a pretty big factor as well. And also, it looks like the Tut has moved further southward, so that has kind of forced this low level circulation to as well merge south with it. So here's a small look here, a look overall at the actual convection IR on Fred, and it's obviously looking pretty good there. So we actually have the actual low pressure kind of right on the very edge, kind of right here is where we have the actual low pressure. So you can see it's quite open. A lot of that convection staying obviously to the east here, but this thing's looking pretty darn good. We have a lot of counterclockwise flow here. We have a pretty good developing elongated core within this low pressure here. it's looking pretty good. You see, overall, it's getting pretty darn close to Tallahassee region. It's gonna start making landfall very soon here, but it's looking really good here. But to keep this video short, I'm gonna have a little bit less details on the actual convection, but just know it's got a really good convection burst and it has a little bit few hot towers that were there initially a few hours ago in those little peaks of over negative 80 degrees Celsius. But overall, it's got some pretty good structure to it. Let's now look at the actual A-scat. A-scat is kind of showing as well a pretty good close core right here. You can kind of see a good core. You see very little initiation kind of to the west of that low pressure, but to the north and northeast and overall east of that low pressure, we have a good and actually some pretty strong winds. You can kind of see A-scat is supporting now 45 knots. So that's definitely extremely interesting here. As well, pressures expected to start really dropping as well. So this is going to start getting very interesting. And as well, GFS and other models are hinting every single run that's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. Specifically, the latest 6Z GFS, which obviously just came out like 30 minutes ago. It's very interesting, but overall, some pretty strong winds on the northeast quadrant, and the wind field as well is expanding a little bit more. So we could very well, as this thing gets stronger, we could see some more widespread storm surge because of how widespread that wind field is getting. So here's obviously a look at the actual wind field. See, the wind field is a lot larger and actually expands now to the southeast of the actual system, because obviously when it kind of yesterday, a lot of that wind field was just specifically northeast of the low pressure. But now it's all the east quadrant. You see nothing at all for the western quadrant. And there we have our tropical warnings. No more watches for Mobile. No more watches down there near Big Bend. Those are all where all those for Big Bend have been replaced for warnings, and Mobile had just been canceled because of that eastern shift. And the cone as well, surprisingly, has moved back over my area. Typically, I'm always running out of luck when it comes to tropical systems. Usually, all forecasts to go straight over my house at first, and then they either go south or way north. And actually, it was going to start going way west. And now it once again has now started shifting back towards my house. So I can see some pretty significant flooding, specifically overnight into tomorrow. It's looking really bad, but there you see landfall. We're gonna start seeing probably a landfall rather soon here, by possibly tomorrow late evening. Here's when we're looking after the landfall, and that's gonna become a tropical depression as it goes north near the Georgia Alabama border, and then post tropical once it gets over the actual Appalachian Mountains. But looking like it's probably gonna get really close to Atlanta. Atlanta may get hit really hard since they're gonna be basically just to the west or just to the east of the actual system, so they could get the northeast quadrant. Here's a look. No models are really showing it getting a high-end tropical storm or hurricane. I saw a lot of people saying this could very well be a hurricane, and there is still an issue with that subtropical ridge. There is still going to be some significant shear to worry about, as well as still some dryer to worry about. However, the dryer is a little bit less of a threat, but people don't really want to have Fred become a hurricane and all that, but I really doubt. I think I said maybe 65 is possible, but I doubt we will get towards 75. But here's a look at the actual intensity guidance. So we have a lot of the majority having it strengthening up to 50 knots. We have a few getting to 55 knots. So this could very well get 65, and I think it can't be ruled out as a possibility. So let's take a look here at the actual now IR here on Grace, and there's a look at that low level circulation. If it can actually load 100%, I'm not sure why it's not loading 100%. There we go. So let's actually get a look at the actual where the actual low pressure is on. Looking at obviously Grace, and it has shifted quite south. You can kind of see it is no longer hitting Hispaniola, and it most likely will not hit Hispaniola, even though it's kind of going a little bit more west northwest instead of northwest like it was expected to. Because again, it's starting. This obviously, since it's so weak, it looks like at this point that Grace is getting steered by the trading wind, since it was obviously getting there was confidence it was going to get stronger. Looks like it was going to get more affected by the actual drop, the tut, and get pushed kind of northwest somewhat for a little bit. But now it's getting pushed by the trade winds. The trade winds are kind of going kind of due west / west northwest. That's exactly where it's going to be going. So here's like the actual convection. It's pretty unorganized, very widespread kind of other areas of convection bursts kind of developing as, I guess, banding. This thing's just overall not looking super organized. And let's actually get a look at the actual A-scat, so you guys can get a look at what A-scat wants for this. And they really want a very disorganized, elongated low. I mean, this is extremely disorganized. I mean, even Tropical Depression 8 looks better than this, and it looked better as an invest. It's exactly why I got downgraded as a tropical depression. It's very disorganized. The LLC just really kind of extremely elongated. There's like I mean, just look at the actual elongated low. This is extremely disorganized. I mean, look, even the western quadrant is extremely disorganized. The only good thing about this storm is probably going to be the eastern quadrant when we're actually getting 30 knots, which is where it is at 35 miles an hour right now. And there's obviously as well no winds that were found on recon or even ASCAT that support tropical storm winds. Here's the actual cone, and boy, has it moved very south. I mean, no longer are we watching out for Louisiana or maybe not even Texas. Mexico is now the area to watch out. I mean, it's going to go far south of Cuba now, and it's expected to start just going west northwest at this point, maybe a little bit northwest once it gets towards closer to Cuba. But I mean, it kind of looks like the GFS was right at some point. Like the GFS, when they said they're going towards the Bay of Campeche, I thought that was very unlikely. But the LLC at that point was found. The LLC is obviously found a lot more far south, and it's continuing to not go as a sharp northwest turn. So it's going to stay, and it may or may not actually make landfall as, or may not even make landfall at Dominican Republic or Haiti. However, it may just skim the very far southern coast there at a tropical depression. And actually, at some point, there were no alerts, watches, or warnings at all last night. And now the watches are back up for Hispaniola. And then it's expected to become back a tropical storm once it gets towards Cuba. I believe at 11 o'clock. They didn't have it becoming a tropical storm until the Gulf of Mexico. They had it going to a they had it staying at the tropical depression the whole time in the Caribbean, but now they have it back to a tropical storm. Specifically, the reasoning they have it back at the tropical storm is because it's going to go through a very, very conducive environment, and that's going to be south of Cuba. There's not going to be much shear. There's going to be some shear, however, the Tut will obviously bring in a little bit less shear than if it were to stay at its original track, and that's exactly why they have it back to a tropical storm as well. The overall extreme amount of ocean heat content we have within this region extremely high and extremely widespread deep ocean heat content. So that's as well another factor to why south of Cuba is a pretty conducive environment, and that's why it could very well become a decent tropical storm before it actually goes towards the Bay of Campeche. So it could very well be maybe 50 miles an hour or so before the Yucatan region. And look, we may see a landfall for Cancun, we may not, but it's expected to go to the northern Bay of Campeche and probably hit Mexico at maybe a 60 mile an hour, maybe 65 mile an hour tropical storm. It really all depends on how well it performs in south of Cuba, because that's kind of where we have the best environment. And I could try to get into detail with that, but this video is already long enough that could very well wait for the afternoon. Here's a look at the guidances, and they're all taking it towards the Bay of Campeche here. I mean, all of that, not even towards Texas. Not even one model is getting to Texas. I mean, look at that. Even the CMI is just south of what kind of where Hannah made landfall there. But a lot of these models obviously kind of staying at far, actually getting very close to Jamaica at some point, but it really will not make landfall in Jamaica. I think we all know that. But we have models all the way down to near the Belize border, and obviously more kind of just north of Cancun. I think at that point it's probably going to go very close to Cancun. So we're just going to keep a very close eye on that as well. Watching out for some more rain for portions near Havana, since they are obviously kind of right in that western tip. Intensity guidance, though, has really gone up a lot for Tropical Depression 7L compared to last night here. Actually, a ton of guidances, model guidances, want to have it to a Category 1 here. So that's extremely, extremely interesting what we're seeing here overall. This could very well be something very interesting because it's such a very conducive environment for areas of south of Cuba. We want to keep a very, very close eye on what we are going to be seeing here because obviously very deep ocean content, a lot better environment that we could very well have to watch out for Grace. It may overperform or it may not. We just keep a very close eye on it. And last but not least, I start talking about as well, looking at overall potential Henri, which is obviously tropical depression 8. And it's likely to become a tropical storm possibly by later today. So looking at letter H very, very soon here. I mean, this thing has really contact together. I mean, it was a very organized invest as well. Tropical storm watches as well for Bermuda. It's expected to go just around Bermuda and then back north. And that's why it's supposed to maybe get to a high-end tropical storm so quickly because how slow it is moving here. I mean, they can probably start moving maybe like only 3 or 4 miles an hour. An extremely incredible environment for around 48 hours. Usually with 48 hours of a conducive environment, you don't really get a high-end tropical storm like that so quickly, considering that it was only an invest yesterday. But since it's moving so slow and in a pretty conducive environment, it's going to get its act together very quickly. Here's a look here. I mean, it's very uncertain the actual track or so, but it looks like it's going to get steered back towards the north east here once it actually loops around here. So not it's not going to be a U.S. threat here. And here's a look at the intensity guidance here. If you're getting to a category or if you're getting to a hurricane, but the majority want to have it sticking to as a tropical storm, but that's definitely pretty reasonable. So here's a look at the actual 60 GFS. So before I actually end the video, I know it's really long right now. I did not want it to be this long at all. But here's a look at the actual 12 or 60 GFS. And you have look at Fred getting to 996 millibars and actually getting as low as 988 millibars. So the GFS is really having an upward trend for Fred. It could very well become a 65 monotropical storm. There we have a look at actually TD8, GFS not having really much with that as well. But look at what they have for Grace. Like I said, it could very well overperform south of Cuba, and that's exactly what it wants to have here. Right now, obviously going south of Dominican Republic, just maybe skidding Jamaica and getting up to 994 there, southwest of Cuba, 993. Then making landfall probably 988 millibars for Yucatan, and then really strengthening, actually possibly rapidly intensifying in the Bay of Campeche. So they're kind of doing very similar to what the H4 has been doing for a while. But hope you guys enjoyed this rather short video. I hope you guys enjoyed this morning thing, and I will have another upload later this afternoon.